Hey guys, Will here. So welcome back to our review series on the brand new Asetek Invicta and Forte wheelbases and Forte steering wheel. Now in the last video, we went into a massive amount of detail on the hardware, the build quality, and all the things that you can expect from the ownership experience if you were to buy one of these things. But today's video, we're gonna be diving straight into the differences in the driving experience between the Invicta wheelbase and the much cheaper Forte wheelbase. By the end of today's video, you should have a good understanding of which one of these two is gonna suit you best. We'll also be doing some cross comparison with some other wheelbases available on the market from other brands too. So by the end of today's video, you should have a much clearer picture of what is going to suit you best. So let's dive in. Okay, so super quick recap on the mechanical differences between the Forte and Invicta before we jump in the car. So the only major difference here is the dimensions, this being a 30mm shorter dimension than the Invicta is. So if you are wanting to get a screen nice and low and close to your eyes, that may make a difference for you. Only 30mm though, so not a huge difference. You'll also notice there is only 4 LED strips, and those are, 21 LED segments in each strip, as opposed to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strips that you have on the Invicta, which each have 25 LEDs in them. Same number of inputs and outputs, same mounting solutions, all the same things that we took a look at in the previous video. So the servo motor that they're using in the Forte base has a peak rating of 18 Newton meters, whereas with the Invicta, we had a peak rating of 27 Newton meters. Now, I've been saying in every wheelbase review for a long time now that I don't drive anywhere near that peak rating of the Invicta or even the peak rating of the Forte base. I generally drive somewhere between about 12 and 14, maybe 15 Newton meters peak torque, depending on the type of car that I'm driving. So if it's a really sort of rigid type car like a GT3 car or a Formula style car, I'll generally run a slightly lower force feedback. If it's something like a street car or maybe a GR86 in iRacing, something like that, something that has a generally lighter kind of steering system to begin with, then I'll bump up the force feedback a little bit to compensate for that. But I always end up somewhere between 12 and 14 or 15 Newton meters at the absolute maximum. But the main difference that I expect to feel here is the difference between the slew rate or the response time of the Forte motor compared to the Invicta. Now, one of the comments that I made on the Invicta, even compared to my Simucube 2 Ultimate that I drive on my daily rig, is that it felt extremely responsive. I described it as almost feeling like it was doing away with some sort of latency that was in the system with every other wheelbase that I've tested previously. So what that meant is that it felt really snappy, really responsive. You could really feel at one with the car, even just in cases where the car would snap sideways under oversteer or something like that, you would immediately get the sensation of the car doing it. And it actually did genuinely make me a little bit better at catching slides than I had been with other wheelbases that I've tested in the past. And my conclusion was that there was 2 reasons that that was the case. So the first element is the slew rate or response time of the motor. It allows the motor to change directions very quickly and respond very quickly to what's going on inside the game. And then the second element, or the second component to that, at least in my observation, seems to be that the motor doesn't require a lot of filtering in terms of the force feedback to bring out a lot of detail without having a robotic or grainy feel. Very, very smooth in operation. So you're able to really sort of, bring out the most of what the game has to offer without having to overly dampen any of the effects to mask any sort of unwanted feeling in the steering wheel. So if we have a quick look in the software here, what we're going to be doing is jumping into Asetek Competizione with exactly the same settings that I was using for the Invicta. The only exception there now being, you can see the torque acceleration limit is capped at 6.7 Newton meters rather than the 9.4 that we had with the Invicta base. So we'll jump in the car now, go for a drive, see what I feel in terms of difference here. And then if I can tell any difference between the two, what I'll do is jump back into the settings, see if I can fine tune things to get them to be closer together. Okay, so we're back in Asetek Competizione in the Aston Martin Vantage around Mount Panorama, exactly the same combo as we tested with the Invicta previously. So we're gonna do the same test just quickly in the pits here, feeling that indeed the steering is absolutely perfectly smooth, exactly like it was with the Invicta. There's no notchiness, there's no torque ripple, nothing like that. Every bit as smooth as what we have with our Simucube 2 wheelbases as a point of comparison, and VRS Direct Force Pro as well for that matter. So again, I can feel the transition of the weight of the car as we transfer that through the steering rack, and everything feels nice and progressive. And yeah, absolutely nothing to complain about there, and no discernible difference between the Invicta and the Forte. So let's head out here, and immediately as the car starts moving, I can feel the texture in the road surface, which is good. There's a good amount of detail there. Put a wheel out on the grass too, and yep, that feels nice and reactive too. I'm feeling a good amount of texture and you know, the graininess of the texture rather than, you know, any graininess in the wheel itself. But yeah, put the wheel out on the grass again too, and yeah, you can see as I'm kind of bumping over those bumps, the steering's reacting really nice. I can feel the road texture underneath as well. It stiffens up nicely as we pick up speed. Let's turn in. And yeah, straight away I can tell you that this 13 Newton meter strength setting that I've got here, which is 5 Newton meters below the peak that this base is capable of, is more than enough strength for me. Now, you guys can see for yourselves, I don't have the biggest arms in the world, but I really don't think that anybody's going to need more than 18 Newton meters of strength, you know, for regular kind of driving. I think you reach a point where, you know, if you make the steering too stiff, you're fighting against the car constantly. It's no longer just communicating what the car's doing, but you're actually physically having to fight against the car constantly with more explosive muscle movements rather than just kind of reacting and balancing the car. So I'm of the belief that if you go too far with a Force VVAC, it just becomes detrimental and, you know, it takes away from the experience rather than adding to it. So again, everybody's going to vary in where their sweet spot is, but for me, between 12 and 15 Newton meters is ideal. But what's interesting here is that it does feel a little more numb than the Invicta did. And that's kind of what I expected. I'm still getting a good amount of detail and texture here, but to be honest, this feels more like my Simucube 2 Ultimate does, I guess, as a point of comparison. And I spent quite a bit of time over the last week and a half that we were testing the Invicta base, just trying to dial my Simucube 2 Ultimate in to give me that same sensation of detail and reactiveness that the Invicta base did. And I just wasn't able to quite achieve it. Now we are talking subtle differences, but this definitely feels a little more dampened and a little more muted than the Invicta base did. And I guess that kind of makes sense because we do have the lower slew rate. And I think that's really what's making the big difference here. I think in terms of the lack of need to have a lot of effects running over the top to filter out noise and things like that, same kind of performance as what we have with the Invicta, and indiscernible really. The textures that I'm feeling in the road, those fine granular details, are all pretty much the same, to the point where I think if I was doing a blind test, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two in those kinds of details. But where it really does feel noticeably different, and again, this is coming from somebody that's tested a lot of different wheelbases, and I'm very, very attuned to that kind of stuff. I think, you know, the average person just jumping in and driving with it probably would struggle a little more than I am, but I just don't feel quite as connected to the car with this as I did with the Invicta base. Again, just running the same settings here. We will tweak the settings in just a minute, but when the back of the car gets a little out of shape there, I was still able to catch it, but I'm just gonna overdrive the car a little bit here and just see whether I'm still there we go. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not lacking, and I would say it's every bit as good as every other wheelbase that I've tested in the past. But comparing it to the Invicta, which was exceptional in its response time and just how reactive it felt, there is a noticeable difference here, at least with the same settings. So what I'll do now is I'll jump in and do a little bit of tweaking. We might wind down the dampening a little bit, fiddle around with a couple of other settings, and just see whether I am able to tune it to feel a little bit closer to the experience that we had with the Invicta. But yeah, I would say removing the strength argument from the equation completely, because I just don't think anybody needs more than 18 Newton meters. There is a compelling reason, at least at this point, to consider the Invicta over the Forte purely because of that response alone. But let's do some tuning now and see whether we can make any difference. So we've spent a number of days now testing and comparing between the Forte base, the Invicta base, and jumping back on my daily driver rig and driving with my Simucube to Ultimate 2. And what it boils down to for me is this: if you're driving more rigid kind of cars like GT3, F3, F1, for example, then for me at least, there is definitely a noticeable improvement in the Invicta base with that additional slew rate, with the additional responsiveness in the wheel. I just find it's a little bit more reactive, a little bit more snappy. I can really get a sense of being connected to the car like I just don't get with any other wheelbase that we've tested. Now, having said that, I'm certainly not speaking poorly of the Forte base. I'd say that across all the different combinations of cars that we tested with different sims that we tested as well, this was very, very close, if not indistinguishable, at least at the torque levels that I run from my Simucube 2 Ultimate, which when you consider the price difference between this and a Simucube 2 Ultimate is absolutely impressive. There's no other way to put it. Now, obviously there is more to the picture than that, ecosystem, software. So again, I would recommend check out our full review so that you can see the differences in terms of the user experience and what it's actually like to own one of these things. But purely from a driving perspective, I would say, again, at the torque levels that I run, so between sort of 12 to 15 Newton meters at the absolute most, this wheelbase is every bit as good as my Simucube 2 Ultimate is, which is really, really darn impressive. In terms of consistency between sim titles as well, just like what we had with the Invicta base, quite consistent until you get into things like F1 2022, Dirt Rally, for example. Those being more simcade style titles, the differences between the two bases is a lot less noticeable, if noticeable at all. Really, I think the key differences lie more in the types of cars that you're driving rather than the sim title that you're going to be using. Now, I tested it with a variety of different types of wheels as well. I used a large diameter 350mm rally style wheel. I used my Gomez wheel. And what I wanted to test by doing that is that when you pair this base with a much heavier wheel with more rotating mass, that it doesn't dampen that overall force feedback to the point where I feel like it's a compelling reason to step up to the Invicta. And look, pretty much like with the Invicta experience at the torque levels again that I was running, I just didn't really feel that the experience was overall diminished. It did have a slight dampening effect on some of the really fine texture details like road texture, grass, rumble strips, things like that, but not when it comes to anything that's important to driving quickly and consistently. And you do still have that little bit of headroom in torque there as well. So say, for example, if you wanted to feel a little bit more road texture with a heavier wheel, you could bump up your force feedback to that 18 mark and then maybe crank up your static force reduction or something like that to reduce the overall sensation of having to fight against the car but still have those defined effects. So again, the dynamic range presented here with 18 Newton meters, I believe, is more than enough for the vast majority of people. Unless you're a really massive person with huge arms and a lot of upper body strength, I just don't see the torque difference between this and the Invicta to be a compelling reason to choose one or the other. It really just does come down to that difference in the overall reactiveness of the Invicta compared to this. And again, we have to put it in the context of, the Invicta is a step above anything else that I've tested in the past. This is much more at parity with the best of the best that we've tested in the past. And again, I think when you consider the price point here, it is exceptionally good value. So I think if you're the sort of person that just wants the best of the best and you can afford it, then yeah, it's a no-brainer. Just get the Invicta. You'll absolutely love it and you'll know that you're getting one of the best force feedback experiences that's possible, at least at this point in time. But if your budget can only stretch to the Forte, then you're absolutely not going to be disappointed with that either. And you probably won't ever really even feel compelled to upgrade, to be honest. It's an absolutely fantastic base. And yeah, I think it will keep you satisfied for many, many, many years to come. So I really hope that this video series has helped you out. If you do have any questions at all, jump down in the comments and let us know. If you decide you want to pick up any of the gear that we've talked about in today's video, including some of the other brands that we've talked about, you can check out their reviews over on boostedmedia.net or via the links down in the description below. While you're down there as well, we do have some affiliate links. If you want to help support the channel at no additional cost, if you wanted to pick up any of the gear that we've talked about, then that is an awesome way of doing so. And we really do appreciate your support there. That's what keeps us running. But yeah, above all, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you do already own one of these, let us know what your experience has been like down in the comments as well. That's always a really valuable thing for people to read. At the end of the day, this is just my own subjective opinion and my own observations, but I really do hope that this has given you a better understanding of which products are going to suit your needs best. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye.